Good morning, everyone. I'm Andrew Fallows. I'm the CPD Quality Assurance Manager at Social Work England, and I'm responsible for the management of the CPD processes within Social Work England. Good morning.
Thanks, Andrew. Rachel, do you want to introduce yourself?
Good morning, everyone. My name's Rachel McCassie and I'm Head of Registration. I head up the registration team for Social Work England.
Thanks, Rachel. And then Phil, do you want to introduce yourself? And then the slides are ready, Phil, so we can just start.
Brilliant, thanks, Matt. So, hello, everyone. I'm Phil Hallam. I'm the very long-winded title of Executive Director of Registration, Quality Assurance and Legal. So I have a number of different jobs at Social Work England. So I'm responsible for our in-house legal team who provide advice and support to all bits of our organisation. I'm also responsible for our information governance and data protection team inside Social Work England, making sure that everyone's data is kept safely and managed correctly. I'm also responsible for our education quality assurance function. And later on this week, there's a session about our education quality assurance and how we sort of, ensure that standards of education of training for social workers training to join the register are approved by us. And I'm also obviously responsible for the function relating to the registration and the register for social workers in England. So this morning's session really is about the register. It's also about obviously our requirements and our role in continuing professional development, about the professional standards and how those three things fit together. But before that, really, I suppose I wanted to talk in my opening session before I hand over to my colleagues who will talk in more detail about some of the areas around the register and around CPD. Really around what it means to be regulated and why we think it's so important, and why we sort of a lot of the work we do is around the regulation and why that matters, I suppose, really. So it's good for all of us, I think, from time to time, particularly in our busy working lives, to remind ourselves why regulation matters and why it's important. And as this slide sort of says, really, lots and lots of different professions are regulated, whether it's social workers or nurses or solicitors or accountants. And regulation, obviously, it's a public good. I often describe it as a public good because society has decided that certain professions are important enough or carry enough risk to require public accountability. And the role of the regulator is to work with the registrant, the social worker in this case, people on our register, and everyone else who has an interest in social work, to sort of provide that level of accountability on behalf of the public and act as a public good. So if you were to take the time to look at our legislation, obviously the purpose or our objective as the regulator is to protect the public. And that's quite a bold statement and quite a broad claim. And it can be quite a difficult concept to explain to ourselves and to everyone else, particularly in the context of a register of 95,000 different people working in all sorts of different contexts and environments in their daily lives. So it's important to recognize, of course, as the regulator, we're not able to be close to all kinds of day-to-day practice. So in many ways, regulation is there to set out a framework that those on the register or those wishing to join the register or the public can use to understand what is expected of a social worker in England, and also what is expected of us as the regulator of that profession, of this profession. So Matt, if you wouldn't mind moving on. So what it means to be regulated for us, of course, as I say, our framework describes that we are there to protect the public. But also it describes that our role is also to maintain public confidence in social work through our regulation, and to declare and uphold standards for the profession, again for the public, and also to sort of ensure the health, safety and well-being of the public through our regulation. So the framework is intended to help maintain that public confidence and improve it over time through a number of things, a number of activities that we're required to do by law. So we set and uphold those standards, but also we set and uphold the standards for education and training. And we ensure, of course, that working with education providers across England, we ensure that the standards for education and training help to ensure that social workers joining the register have been given the skills they need to be able to join our register and start practicing. And that's a large part of our work, is working with education providers and others to make sure that our education and training standards are met. As you will all know, obviously, we set the professional standards for everyone once they join the register, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. We'll certainly talk this morning about our work in holding the register so that everyone knows who is registered to be a social worker in England and how they will continue to meet our professional standards once they've joined the register. And again, we'll talk about this in detail this morning. As part of holding our register, we obviously need to demonstrate to the public that people on our register continue to develop their skills and knowledge. And we do this through our requirements around CPD. And we will talk more detail about that in a moment. And then finally, of course, one of the things that people often know about a regulator, but is a tiny part of our work, is investigating those occasions where someone may have fallen short of our standards and taking action where we think it might be necessary to protect the public from an individual social worker who may have fallen short of our standards. So really what it means for us to be regulated as set out in our legislation, but also through all the work we do, is working with providers to ensure that the right people get the right training to join our register, making sure that everyone that then joins our register understands what is expected of them through our professional standards, holding that register so the public can be assured about the people that have the right skills and knowledge to do the thing that requires registration. And as part of that, operating our CPD scheme to continue to ensure people develop their skills and knowledge, and investigating concerns where we need to, where those concerns might mean there is a risk to the public. So Matt, if you wouldn't mind moving on, please. So thank you. So I want to talk very briefly about the professional standards. So as some of you will know, in fact, I'm sure all of you will know, the professional standards were developed by us in consultation with a range of different people and voices as we were setting ourselves up to become the regulator in 2019. And what our standards do is set out how people on the register should act, should behave in order to provide that confidence to the public, and therefore in turn assist with our objective of ensuring public protection. So our standards cover areas of professional behaviour and ethics, and they're very much focused around, as you can see, behaviour and ethics, rather than necessarily around individual technical skills, you might say, to be able to practice. There are different ways that we can work with others, for example, through CPD, to understand that. Our standards are around demonstrating to everyone how a registered social worker, once they join our register, will act. So our standards really sit at the heart of the work that we do. And that's why the work of our registration function, which we'll come on to talk about shortly, focuses on ensuring that social workers commit to those standards when they join our register. And of course, through our renewal process, we also ask social workers to reconsider and recommit to those standards every time that they renew their registration. So our professional standards are a really, really crucial part of our demonstration to the public through the work that we do with social workers to ensure that everyone understand and be confident in the work of those on the register. So the register itself is therefore the way that we demonstrate to the public that social workers remain committed to our standards. But also the work of the registration team in maintaining that register also encompasses all aspects of helping the public have confidence in those on the register. So there are a number of different things that the team does, and some of that, will interact with you all the time, really, in relation to how we operate. And my colleague Rachel, who's the head of registration, will now sort of explain a bit more, really, around the work of the team and all the different things that the registration team do to ensure that everyone is able to sort of, work effectively as a social worker in England, and we can demonstrate that confidence to the public. Thank you. Rachel.
Thank you, Phil. So I just thought it would be helpful if I spent a few minutes just covering the work that the registration team does. As it says on the slide, the team's primary responsibility is to maintain the social work register. And what really motivates and directs our work at maintenance of that register, which in the driest sense of things means we spend our days looking after a very big list. It's the thing that motivates and gives us purpose is really understanding the importance that the list is the specialist register for social work in England. And that means for individual social workers that they're able to practice in the profession they've trained for, and for members of the public that they can have confidence that those people meet our threshold professional standards, alongside knowing wherever people trained or qualified, we have deemed that they have the equivalent education and training standards to be able to practice as a social worker in England. What does that mean on a daily basis for the team? It means that we're making assessments of people who wish to join the register for the first time. Predominantly that's newly qualified social work graduates, but we also get 500 or so applications a year from people who qualified in social work outside of the United Kingdom, which in our first year of regulation, as I reflect back, that's really starting to give us a really helpful insight into social work globally, as well as the work that we see in England. We receive just over 1,500 applications to rejoin the register each year. So again, the assessment that we make is slightly different. This is about really ensuring that people have kept their social work skills and knowledge up to date. So when they rejoin the register, we can be also sure that they meet those threshold standards. And if there have been any changes into somebody's ability to practice safely and effectively, we can give that due diligence at the same time. For registered social workers, we spend a lot of our day considering whether to annotate the register because somebody's completed a course or training as an approved mental health professional or a best interest assessor. We spend our days helping and advising social workers about their registration, but also dealing with requests from people who wish to leave the register for one reason or another. Since March last year, the Coronavirus Act of 2020 has given us emergency powers to grant temporary registration to groups of people to ensure that there are sufficient social workers available during the pandemic. Along with a number of other regulators, this was a concerted effort to identify and to notify the initial group of people that we granted temporary registration to at the end of March last year. And for the time being, we continue to maintain this while we all live under the cloud of a global pandemic. So the next thing I wanted to talk to you about more generally is the social work register itself. The register and its contents are legislated. Our secondary legislation, the Social Workers Regulations of 2018, really is our guiding light to direct us on what we should be maintaining and considering. I can't just choose to add something onto the register because you or I are interested in a certain attribute. The requirements are laid out in Regulation 9 and its associated rules, which really provide that regulatory framework that we have to abide by. There's an excerpt of the register on our web pages, and this allows people, anybody, to search for a registered social worker, to be confident that they do hold registration with us. And we also hold a full register, which the registration team have access to and maintain, because of course some of the things on that register would not be appropriate to be in the public domain, such as a home address of a social worker, but it is information that we need to access from a registration perspective, and our rules dictate that we should hold this information, we must hold this information. So there's the public register, which you can all access, and the full register, which we maintain as a team. Part 3 of our registration rules, amongst other things, requires us to ensure that all social workers on our register are able to practice safely and effectively. We make these checks when people apply to join or to rejoin the register, and also it's also part of the annual renewal questions. And this again serves to give the public reassurance that people who hold registration are able to practice safely and effectively. This might include us considering convictions or a health declaration received at renewal, but also gives us reassurance that registered social workers continue to meet our threshold standards, which are so important as a regulator. And I just wanted to read you out the sentence really to say, what does that mean? And it means everybody that renews they confirm that they have read and understood the regulator's professional standards and undertake to abide by them. Really, really powerful words from my perspective. If your name isn't on the register, you're not able to practice as a social worker. You're not able to use the protected title of social worker in England or practice as a social worker in England. And from my perspective, that register really is the heart of regulation of social workers in England. Couple of last slides from me before we move on. First of all, just that the registration year runs from the 1st of December to the 30th of November. Those dates are laid out in our rules. They were consulted on prior to us going live as a regulator and would need further public consultation if we ever plan to change those dates. So for those of you that are registered social workers in our audience, keep those dates imprinted in your mind, please. And then I'm just going to take the opportunity while I'm talking to you just to give you a really heartfelt thank you to absolutely everybody who did complete the annual renewal last year. It was our first year of regulation, and it just so happens that it happened at the same time as we found ourselves in the midst of a global pandemic. By renewing and continuing to give us assurance that you continue to meet our standards and can practice safely and effectively, it felt even more significant given the situation globally. So thank you very, very much. Over the next few months, we'll take all of the feedback that we've received from a variety of sources, including the survey that registered social workers completed at the end of their renewals application. And make refinements and improvements in preparation for September this year's renewal opening. So thank you. And then I guess my final point is that changes to your information. Renewals is a really, really important activity that we ask everybody to undertake on an annual basis. But all social workers do have a duty under our regulatory framework to update us about any changes to their information. And I really wanted this slide to reflect what it says in the regulation as soon as is practicable. So please do let us know if there are any changes to your name, contact information, employment information, or your ability to practice safely or effectively. Don't just save that up until renewals. We want to have a relationship with you on a much more regular basis than just that annual renewals interaction. So please take advantage of that. And how might you do that? Well, we have, from my perspective, the easiest way for you to do that is to use the online account that we make available to all registered social workers. You can use this at any time of day or night to let us know about any changes. We continue to make refinements and improvements to our guidance and to the account interface to make it as easy as possible for you to let us know about those changes as soon as is practicable. Perhaps as well, that might be the place that you might go to record your CPD, which my friend and colleague Andrew Fellows is going to spend a bit of time talking to you next. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Rachel, for that. Thank you. So yes, I'm going to cover the section on CPD, and we know that there's a lot of interest in the social work profession about CPD. As an organisation, Social Work England gets a lot of inquiries about our CPD requirements, and past events that we've run have been very well attended. So over the next few minutes, I'm going to talk about the CPD standard, part of the professional standards, which Phil talked about earlier. I'm going to talk about CPD requirements that we have in Social Work England, the links that CPD has to your individual registration if you are a social worker, and why CPD is important to the social work profession. So those of you who are social workers in the room today will be familiar with the CPD process and requirements from last year. You'll have recorded CPD in your online account, which we've just seen on the screen there. And some of you might even have been selected for validation earlier this year and are awaiting the outcome of that process. During the year ahead, we plan to make some small changes to our online recording system to address some of the feedback that we had last year, to look at how we can improve the user experience when you're recording your CPD. But from the outset, I'll just say overall, our CPD requirements for this year and the process will not change. So what you did last year will be what you need to do this year in terms of recording CPD. I would mention, though, that later this year we'll be talking to the sector and to the public about how we can develop our approach to CPD in future years. So you'll be hearing more from us later this year about that and how you can get involved. Could I have the next slide, please, Matthew? Thank you. So CPD is embedded in your professional standards. It's standard for the professional standards. And as Phil described, the professional standards as a whole aim to improve public safety and confidence in the social work profession. So by undertaking and recording CPD, you're demonstrating your continued fitness to practice, and you show to us that you meet one of your registration renewal requirements. We've taken on our website, you'll see we have various documents which include a definition of what CPD is. And if you've not seen that, then CPD is the reflection and learning that you do throughout your career to maintain and improve your practice. And it's central to the way that you work as social workers. It's fundamental to your practice. Could I have the next slide, please? So we've not actually prescribed what CPD you should do. In fact, we said the CPD that you do can be anything that's relevant to your practice. I think it's really important to say that it's not just about training courses. I think there is a perception within the profession that CPD is about training courses, and we've said that it can be anything really that's relevant to you. But what we have said is that you should provide at least one piece of CPD during the registration year. And when you record your CPD, you must provide a reflection describing the positive impact that the CPD has had on your practice. If you want to renew your registration later this year, you must record your CPD by the 30th of November at the very latest. Last year, we saw a big spike in recording during November. And, obviously that is the deadline. But what I would say is to help prevent any difficulty of your registration at the end of the renewal period, we'd really encourage you to record your CPD earlier and regularly during the year. So turning to the reasons why social workers should do CPD, there are many reasons, but I think it's better if I actually use some quotes that social workers have provided to us to describe the benefits, as they can provide to explain that much better than I can. So in recent feedback, one social worker told us that CPD allows me to grow professionally. It provides a useful space out of the rhythm of work to reflect on my practice. Another social worker said, it helps me to learn and reflect, which helps with my career. You see different ways of doing things. A third said, if you don't refresh your knowledge, you lose it, and your practice is out of date. Another social worker, talking about their role as a manager, said, it's important to ensure modelling of best practice to the team, and for me to be up to date, so that when I'm giving information to my team, they're getting the most up-to-date practice. Another social worker told us, it gives me the tools to do work better, to work with children and families, to better understand poverty and deprivation, to see what you can put in place to help kids. And finally, a social worker reflected that it's important that we keep developing ourselves as practitioners to strive to be the best we can be, learn about new developments to support our work and the people we work with. So, I mean, that's summed up on the slide there, but I think the words from the social workers themselves are much better than what the words on the slide in terms of describing why CPD is important to the social work profession. Could we move on to the next slide, please, Matthew? So I mentioned already that CPD is not just about training, and I would really like to reiterate that point. It can be a range of activities as set out on the slide that benefit you and your practice. So the examples that we have there are peer review, articles that you can read and journal articles, work shadowing, Obviously, training courses, be they online or classroom based, are important as well. Discussions with colleagues. There's a whole range of things that we'd encourage you to think of as your CPD. What I'd ask you to do is there are probably other things that you can think of that aren't shown here. So if you can think of anything else that you'd like to share with colleagues, please post that in the chat. One other thing I'd like to reflect on as well, in terms of the last 12 months, is I think it's important to say that we've seen our social workers have had to adapt and change their practice in response to COVID. And in recording CPD, many social workers have taken this as an opportunity to reflect on what they've learned from COVID and the impact that it's had on their practice. Now, obviously, COVID as an event has been enormous, bigger than anything else, but there are other events that happen in day-to-day work, which you can also use to reflect on as part of your CPD. Go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So the CPD standard itself has 8 parts. Hopefully you're familiar with those, and I'm not going to dwell on the details of those, but I will reflect that the CPD standard is wide-ranging. And as Phil pointed out earlier, as part of the professional standards, it was developed through consultation with the sector in 2019. You can see from the elements that are on the screen that we encourage the use of feedback and supervision to inform practice as one of the areas that you can consider. We also want to see how things like research and frameworks and theories have been used to inform your practice and keep your knowledge up to date, so you're aware of changes in legislation and policy developments that affect your particular area of work and expertise. The central part of the standard, though, is how you reflect on the CPD that you've done and how you describe the impact that it's had on your practice. So if you are one of the 2.5% of people that we select each year for validation, this is what we'll be looking at. Well, when we look at your CPD records, we'll be looking for a description on the impact that for a reflection and the impact that the CPD is on your practice. So as an example, if you read an article about county lines, when you read that article, what did you learn from it? What impact or difference did the learning have on the way on your practice? What difference did it make from reading the article? So yes, please do record that you've read the article, but tell us what impact it's made, what difference it's made. So for us, it's really about the so what of the CPD that you've done. Can I have the next slide, please, Matthew? So during the course of last year, our first year as a regulator, obviously we had lots of questions from people about our requirements and what we wanted people to provide us with. And we got a lot of questions from social workers who weren't practicing at the time or who held roles where they weren't directly working with people with experience. And the questions were asking us how they can demonstrate that they meet the CPD standard if they're not practicing. So I think the first and most important thing to say here is that the requirement to provide us with evidence of CPD applies to everyone who wants to remain on the register. It applies to all social workers in all roles and all settings. So in circumstances where you aren't currently practicing, or if you don't ask a caseload, we have put some information up on our website, and we're going to continue to develop that in the year ahead, giving more guidance and steerage on CPD and how you can meet our requirements. But in an instance where you're not currently practicing or you don't have a caseload, then we'd ask you to think about reflecting on how your work influences social work practice more generally, or think about how your life experience influences your practice. You could get feedback on your leadership or teaching if you work in a management or academic social work role. And remember that when we've talked about supervision, it doesn't have to be top down. You can use peer supervision as well to reflect on that feedback from colleagues and others, as well as people that you work with people with experience. If you're not currently working, which obviously we know some people are out of the workplace for a variety of reasons, then when you're recording your CPD, think about the impact that it will have when you return to the workplace. So as I say, there's more information about this in blogs on our website, as well as a range of other information about our CPD requirements. Can I have the next slide, please? So a lot of questions we get asked are about the roles of managers and employers. So as a regulator, we don't regulate organisations. We regulate individual social workers on the register. But it is important for us to say that managers and employers play an important role in supporting social workers with their CPD. So CPD is the personal responsibility of each individual social worker, which is, you know, that's the key point. However, we'd encourage managers to hold regular discussions with social workers in their team about their CPD and their learning. And managers can also provide support to social workers by providing time to undertake and reflect on CPD that social workers have done. So as we set out on the slide there, you know, managers do have a responsibility in terms of supporting their social workers with their CPD, but the responsibility for recording CPD does sit as an individual responsibility with you as a social worker. One thing we'd also ask employers to encourage is that their social workers, social workers in their organisation as a whole, apply as early as possible to renew their registration rather than leave it to the last minute. This helps ensure that there's time to resolve any problems that may arise when making a registration renewal application. We did see a lot of people leave their renewal to the very last minute last year, and then that obviously didn't give much time to address any questions that arose as a result of that. So going on to the next slide, I'm just going to talk through the validation process that we use as an organisation. So each year, and this is our first year, we randomly select 2.5% of the social workers who've renewed their registration to have their CPD checked. And those people who've been registered for some time may be familiar with what HCPC called an audit. We call this a validation assessment. And what happens is, as I said, we select 2.5% of social workers randomly. There are some people who are exempt from that selection, and they're listed on the slide. So that's people who are currently subject to a fitness to practice investigation or sanction, and also those who haven't been on the register for 12 months. So if you are one of the 2.5% of people who are selected, we notify you that you've been selected, but you don't have to do anything. What we do is we look at the CPD that you've recorded on in your account during the previous 12 months, and we carry out an assessment of that. And that assessment is carried out by a team of independent assessors who are a mixture of registered social workers themselves and also experts in quality assurance. And they assess the records that you provided us, and they're looking for whether you've described the impact of the CPD on your practice and in your reflection. So at the end of that period, so we've just come into the end of that now. It started in January. At the end of the validation assessment period, we get back in touch with everybody who's been selected with an outcome of the assessment, and we let them know whether the CPD has been accepted or not. So if it's been accepted, then that's the end of that. Nothing else that you need to do. If the CPD hasn't been accepted, what we do in that instance is give you advice, and you'll be provided with advice from the assessor on what you need to do in future when recording your CPD. And you'd also be then included in the following year's validation exercise. So next December, if you renew your registration, your CPD will be validated against the same criteria. So that's an overview of the validation process that we have in place. So can we move on to the next slide? Okay, so just a few things, key points for you to take away and remember from the presentation today. So the deadline to record CPD and apply to renew your registration is the 30th of November each year, and the renewals opens on the 1st of September. And we would encourage you to start that process as soon as possible, so to ensure that there are no issues with any of the information you provide, so we can ensure you're ready to be carry on practicing as a social worker when your registration renews on the 1st of December. You need to provide CPD as part of the renewal process, and the CPD that you provide to us must have a valid date for the registration year in order to be used for renewal. So what that means is that the CPD that you do must have been done within the current registration year. We do require you to record at least one piece of CPD each year, but good practice would be you record more than that, and would encourage you to record 4 times a year to show that continuous learning that you're doing as a professional. And the final point there is that the CPD is unique to you. There is no one correct way to do CPD. You need to make sure that you're doing CPD that's relevant to you and your practice and of value to you as a professional. The type of CPD that you do is up to you, but what we want to see from you is how you've reflected on that CPD and what the impact has been on your practice. And I think my final slide is just to talk about some of the next steps and what we're doing this year. So obviously I've mentioned validation, which is just about concluded, and people should be hearing the outcomes of that soon. Back in December, we started some research that we commissioned with YouGov. And so this was to look at the experiences that social workers had of CPD more generally. So what their attitudes are to CPD, what the barriers are to CPD, what's available to them, what types of CPD they're doing, but also to understand how they engaged with our CPD process as well, and whether there are any barriers there and what we could do to improve that going forward. So YouGov conducted a survey with 500 responses to that. They also carried out 2 90-minute online focus groups with two groups of different groups of social workers, and they also carried out in-depth interviews with social workers as well. The final report of that research is due very soon, so we're looking forward to seeing that, and we'll be using that to understand how people are experiencing CPD in their workplace and more generally, and how they experience our CPD process, and that will feed into our future strategy planning and consultations around CPD later this year. The validation, as I say, is just about concluded. We're running feedback sessions with the 10 CPD assessors to understand their experience of the process, how it went, to look at how we can improve that, but also importantly to get an understanding from them of the types of CPD that they looked at when they reviewed the 2.5% of records that were looked at. We've also carried out, as part of the renewals process, an experience survey. So everybody who renewed had an opportunity to take part in that survey. We got 855 responses between September and December, and the key things from that are being analysed. And again, we'll be using that to feed into the development of our renewals process, so we can further improve that as we go forward. And we're also carrying out some user research as well to understand how people use the My account, so we can look at again how we can make that a better experience for people and make those continuous improvements to the way we provide that facility. So I think that's my last slide, and I'm going to hand over to Phil.
Thanks, Andrew, and thanks, Rachel, as well. I suppose really all I wanted to end with was return to thinking about the professional standards for a moment, because obviously, as Andrew's really sort of explained, the demonstration of continuing professional development is a really important part for us, along with the process of registration and renewal, in helping social workers and the public understand how important the professional standards are to ensuring a safe and effective register, and also to ensure that they can continue to develop and improve public confidence. So that's why we take our CPD requirements so seriously, and why we're so keen and so pleased that so many of you were able to engage with that over the course of our first year. Also, of course, why we ask that specific question about the professional standards, and as Rachel pointed out, it's in our legislation as part of the process of renewal, but also, of course, at the process of initial registration or rejoining the register. And over time, we'll continue to make sure that the standards continue to be the correct ones for the profession. And over time, we're sure that we may change how they are described or change the guidance that supports them. And when we do that, of course, we will ensure that we gather, as we did before when we created them, a range of voices and experiences to help us develop really effective professional standards that describe effectively the behaviours that social workers demonstrate every day and that the public can expect from those who are on our register. And I suppose I'll leave it there, really. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil, and thanks to Andrew and Rachel as well. We do have some time for questions now. There's been some questions put in the chat, so I'll maybe revisit them, and then once we've covered those, we'll open it up for people to raise their hands, and we can cover them as well. So there was a question from Donna, and I think this comes back to you, Andrew, particularly in relation to the forms. Donna finds the forms, the structure of the unstructured forms, maybe a little bit restrictive in terms of reflection, and the headings don't always fit what Donna's trying to get across. So is there consideration about introducing a third form or a review of the forms? Donna, please unmute and come back if that doesn't cover what you asked. But Andrew, are you happy to pick that up?
Sure, Matthew. Yeah, so we are looking at the forms that are on the in my account at the moment. So the structured and unstructured forms. We're reflecting on the feedback that we had last year and looking at how they were used, and the assessors are giving us some feedback on that. We are considering making changes to those forms. Any changes that we make will be from December, not before, because we're midway in a registration year now. So practically, it's not possible to change that because some people have already started recording their CPD. So we are looking at making some changes, or potentially looking at making changes to the forms from December. If any changes that we make, we'll be talking to the profession about that. So we'll be going out to consultation later this year, we think. And one of the issues that we'll be looking at is potentially changes to the forms and the questions that are included in those forms and how those forms work. So yeah, that's something that we are looking at the moment. But for this registration year, the forms will remain broadly the same. What we think we're going to do is put some clarifications onto the forms and guidance to make it a bit clearer what we're looking for.
Thanks, Andrew. Donna, hopefully that does answer your question. If not, just raise your hand, Donna, and we can come back to you. So there's been another question from Sabi. Huge apologies if I've mispronounced your name there. But this question again is for you, Andrew, and focuses really around validation. I'll read it out so we can get the wording right. So Sabi's keen to know how many registered social workers have been employed to assess the 2.5%, and Sabi does not feel comfortable with a non-social worker assessing their CPD. How can we as the regulator ensure consistency? You maybe covered some of that in the validation slide, Andrew, but I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that and some of the rationale around that.
Yeah, I can explain that. So we recruited 10 independent assessors. 5 of them are registered social workers and 5 of them are lay assessors. So they work as a team assessing the records. And that is, I believe that is the similar model to what HCPC had in terms of a mix of lay and registered. So each record is looked at by one assessor. Where there is a question over whether the CPD meets our requirements, it is then looked at by a second assessor before a decision is made. So there are checks and balances within the process to make sure that it's not just one assessor that is giving a negative outcome. So hopefully that gives you some reassurance there.
Thanks, Andrew. Again, Sabi, if that doesn't answer your question, feel free to unmute or raise your hand, and we can bring you in. There's I can't see any more questions in the chat. Apologies if I've missed any, but if people do have additional questions, feel free to raise your hand. Now will be a good time to do it. So just along the top of your screen or along the bottom in some people's browsers, there's the hand up feature, which you can just raise, and then we'll be able to see that. Naomi, you were first in there. Naomi, feel free to unmute and ask your question. Thank you.
How exciting to be first in. Thank you very much.
You were quick off the mark. Well done.
So I'm one of the social workers that's been selected to have my CPT looked at. And I find myself in quite a nervous position to record any more CPD in case the way I've been doing it has been wrong up to now and I have to go back and modify it all. I know that there's another few weeks until we hear the outcome of the moderation. If you've got any advice, do you think I'm worrying unnecessarily? Do you think it's worth just cracking on with the forms anyway? What would you suggest?
Andrew, I think that one's for you again. Do you want any reassurances you can give to Naomi?
Yeah, so we are sending out the outcomes now, and the remainder of the outcomes should be sent out in the next few weeks. So you will find out within a few weeks what the outcome is. So obviously, to renew your registration, you do need to record one piece of CPD, but we do encourage you to record more during the year. If you have recorded CPD already, and you are one of those people who are given advice on future recording, then you are able to go back into the CPD that you've recorded and amend that. So there is a facility to go back in and edit the record that you've already made. So what I would say is that if you have recorded CPD, that's great. Thank you for doing that. You're one of the ones who are kind of, quick off the mark and have got in this year already. If you do receive advice from the assessor, then I'd ask you to reflect on that advice and possibly go back in and edit the piece that you recorded and reflect on what the assessor said. So that would be my advice to you.
Thanks, that's really clear. I wonder if it's worth for next year maybe putting some advice out for people that have been selected for moderation, in case there's anyone else in the same situation as me, just to encourage them to keep recording, because if they get advice, I think they can go back and amend or even reflect on the advice they've been given.
That's a good point. Thank you for that. Yes, I'll take that away.
Thanks, Naomi. We've possibly got time for one more question. And Richard, you have got your hand up there, so you feel free to unmute, Richard, and ask your question. And then I think we'll then have run out of time, unfortunately. But
sorry.
Thanks, Richard.
Morning, guys. In relation to the support from employers, because as you stated, or what is actually expected, that employers are to support the social workers in carrying out the CPDs. And we are expected actually to write something reflecting our work or how we developed within our practice. Now, is there any way the Social Work England can really audit to see whether the employers are really supporting the social workers in doing this? Because I see it's, like you said, the responsibility of not only the social worker, but also the registration body, the employer, as well, and of course the legislation that guides the practice.
Andrew, I suspect that's possibly another one for you, or Phil. I can see you've just unmuted.
Yes, I mean, Andrew, please feel free to sort of chip in as well. But I think yes, we certainly continue to sort of work alongside sort of employing organisations and employers to remind them of how they can help assist the individual registrants or people on the register, comply with the requirement to demonstrate their CPD every year. And we did a lot of work through all sorts of different ways over the course of the last year to help social work employers understand how they can assist, and we'll continue to sort of use the learning from this first CPD and renewal process to go into the year we're in now to continue to help push those messages to employers. But I suppose what we're trying to really sort of get across in that is, while the employers can assist and employers can do some things to help social workers make sure they meet the CPD requirement, the requirement is for an individual social worker to demonstrate their CPD in whatever way works for them, depending on how they are practicing, or indeed if they're not in practice, how they want to demonstrate their CPD to maintain their registration. So we continue to make sure that everyone understands the balance between an employer being there to provide support and assistance to a social worker if that's the correct thing for them to do in meeting the requirement, but it is a requirement of an individual social worker in whatever way they think is best to meet the individual requirement to demonstrate their CPD. And that's why we've created a CPD system for the moment, certainly, that is as flexible as possible, so people can demonstrate how they meet the standards around CPD in as many different ways as is available to them. Andrew, I think anything else you want to add about that, really?
No, Phil, absolutely, you've covered it. I think the only thing I'd say to add one point is that last year we did some work with the Local Government Association, and as an example, and they have standards on their website for employers of social workers, which set out what employers should do with social workers who are in their employment, and that covers CPD. So that's an example of the type of thing that Phil referred to.
Okay.
Thanks, both, and hopefully that answered your question, Richard. And just to reiterate, really, an offer of the regional engagement leads. I am a regional engagement lead. I cover the Northwest, and really just covering what Phil talked about in terms of we've been doing a lot of work with employers over the last year, over the last couple of years, around what the new standards are. Similarly with individual social workers as well, to try and line that up. So although we can't say to an employer, you have to do this, this and this, we want employers to understand what the requirements are for social workers, to then be able to support social workers to meet those requirements. So that work will continue. Richard, I'm not sure what area you live in, but we will put the links into the regional engagement leads, and it might be worth having
London region, yeah.
So you have a brilliant regional engagement lead in London, Julie, who you can have a conversation with and make links with your employer and Julie, and we can try and support both you and your employer as well.
That's good. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. So just to wrap up, I'm conscious of the time. We've just tipped into 11:40. We're going to add some really just to thank everybody for coming today, giving up your time. But thanks to Phil, thanks to Rachel, thanks to Andrew for providing the content. We've added some links in to the chat. We will add the link in for the survey. Would really appreciate feedback. Would really appreciate taking a couple of minutes. It should only take a couple of minutes to fill that survey out. And you can click that link and it will take you off to be able to do that. But again, huge thank you. Hope you've got something from the session today. And hopefully you can attend the sessions in tomorrow and Friday as well. But thanks very much for everybody's time. And just a little gentle reminder, you can use this session for CPD as well. Reflect on what we've talked about, reflect on what we've been discussed, how it's going to impact on your practice, how it's going to impact on your role, what can you take away from it. All those types of reflections can be uploaded and added to your Social Work England account for CPD. But thanks very much for everybody's time, and hope to see you all soon.
Thanks very much, and thank you, Matt, as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.